What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. You hear me talking first, so you guessed it. It's a solo episode with me. Dillon's back to doing his traveling thing, and we are just crazy busy at the construction company these days. Busy in a good way, but it's taken up the bulk of our time doing our real jobs. So for today, I'm going to leave you guys with a replay of an episode that I think is pretty relevant these days, actually. It's a meaningful episode to me personally, as it was the first episode that I was ever on with Dillon way back a couple years ago now. Dillon actually had me on as a guest, did a full interview talking about what we do at Schaefer Construction and my thoughts on the industry. And I tell you what, those thoughts haven't changed a whole lot, especially towards the end. We got to get into what the real problems are that we're facing today with the construction industry in general, and lack of labor and lack of young people coming into the trades, and what we can do about it. So with that, I'm going to leave you. Again, it's a cool episode for me. I think it means a lot. I think it's still a problem we need to work on. So give it a listen, and then let's get in touch if you got some ideas. I'm always chatting with people. People literally call me every day, or every week rather, wanting to talk about this Make the Trades Cool Again effort and how we can help and what we can do. There is a way we can fix this collectively. There's a way we can fix this through collaboration. Sometimes it takes pivoting. Sometimes it takes being able to adapt and overcome. But it's an industry that Dillon and I both love greatly, and we are willing to put in the work. That's why we do this week in, week out, for you guys to listen to and to hopefully spark some ideas into your mind so that you can go out and do something helpful with it. Episode 95, Make the Trades Cool Again.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Construction Partner Podcast. Guys, like I promised, it won't just be me this week. We have a special guest, and I'm excited to bring on Matt Vetter, who's an entrepreneurial-minded business leader and an expert in pre-construction services. Pre-construction is going to be something that we'll really dive in here, because it's one of the big topics, I think, across the industry right now. Matt is currently serving as vice president and a partner in Schaefer Construction, and Schaefer is a growing design build GC in Brighton, Michigan, which is about 30 minutes north of Ann Arbor, which is my wife's alma mater, the good old Go Blue. So Matt's career spans all aspects of residential, commercial, and for more than 2 decades, he's worked in various roles: self-employed, lone wolf consultant, to a department director of a large construction firm, and now as an owner and partner in charge of all facets of the business. Matt's an avid hunter and fisherman, and tends to spend as much time as possible outdoors, which is why I think construction is a great fit, with his wife, 3 kids, and family dogs, which you can probably hear mine in the background. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Dillon, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I know we've, even in your bio, kind of spanned a little bit of everything, but what initially got you into construction?
So initially, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, it was money. I started off kind of as a, hump and lumber type laborer for a residential squad in Michigan here when I was my last couple years of high school. And at the time I got to be outside. I made a lot of money. It was typically under the table. There wasn't a whole lot of intrinsic value that I saw in the industry at that time. It was just kind of a fun thing to do with my buddies. Obviously it kind of transformed from that point on, but yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, it was the paycheck at the end of the day.
I think a lot of the guests I've had on, that's probably their initial thing, whether it was in the family business where they got dragged in, or just for a paycheck and kind of stayed with it. And I guess really that leads me to, why'd you stay with construction for so long?
Yeah, and it wasn't a family business. My father was in finance. My mom stayed at home with my brothers and I. So I got my first taste of it, like I mentioned, in residential. We built custom homes, and I fell in love with it. I loved creating. I loved, the look on people's faces when you hand them over the keys to their finished product. And it quickly became a means to really support myself. I ended up putting myself through college, through U of M, with my construction job. So it fit really well. And then, since then it's kind of transformed in a myriad of ways, but, I made the leap to the commercial side in early 2000s, mid 2005-ish, and really haven't looked back since then.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big leap. I guess if you're doing big, high-end residential to commercial, it's not maybe as big a leap. But what were in making that leap, what were some of the big challenges that you had to overcome, or how you approached projects that might differ from residential to kind of the commercial world?
It was a huge leap, and it was really out of necessity. As everything was kind of crumbling with the nation's economy, we were doing a lot of work for big three auto executives in the area, and their money kind of started drying up, it seems, at the time anyways, before everybody else. So, there was kind of writing on the wall of, impending doom to the industry. I had an opportunity through a mutual connection to make that leap into commercial. And, sometimes you got to fake it till you make it. And I'll stand behind that to anybody who wants to argue it. But that, I had the background, obviously. I had a decade or so of good, solid residential construction experience. It's a far cry from the commercial world. So there was a lot of bumps and bruises that I took right out of the gates, and along the way in the next decade of kind of quote unquote learning as I ran with it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially on the residential side, and how, and this is commercial to an extent too, where an area can be so dependent on, like, for obviously Michigan, a lot of that economy, and especially in that southeastern Michigan, is dependent on, the big three car companies, and how that can quickly transition an entire, area and region, from kind of the rise and fall of just a few companies. And the same could be said in commercial for, whether it's healthcare, higher ed, or some of the other big kind of typical builders within a economy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big three especially drive it here, and it was telling, and luckily I made the leap when I did, because a lot of the residential guys didn't fare too well through that. So when I first started off in the commercial side, I was a road warrior. I was on the road or on an airplane 5 or 6 days a week. So I was able to kind of pockets of the economy, if you will, around the country for a while. Commercial to begin with, I got in with some folks and was building a lot of quick serve pizza restaurants, and that really was my bread and butter for almost a decade. It cut my teeth on a lot. It put a lot of frequent flyer miles in my account, but it also kept me away from my wife and my growing family. At the time when I started, I had one son. Now I have 3. So being on the road that much just got too much. And kind of likewise, I transitioned into more of a, heavier commercial, light industrial, some retail, aspects of those markets locally. And I've gone to a couple different places, but now where I'm at with Schaefer Construction, we really are focusing on really cool projects, is the best way I can explain it. We build everything outside of single family homes. And it's just, it's a great ride. So it took a lot of learning, and if I could give a residential guy any advice, a residential guy that wants to go commercial, you got to learn fast, and you got to be willing to fail and fail fast and learn from it, because you will definitely take your bumps and bruises.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And one thing before we get into what you're kind of currently working on with Schaefer is within construction, some of us might think it's, always a regional thing. And kind of as you explained, it can be a national opportunity for people that are willing to travel. Obviously, travel is not always as glamorous as it might be made out to be at times. Granted, if you're in your probably 20s and probably early 30s, it's not too bad to be traveling that much. But as your family grows and other obligations kind of creep in on the home front, traveling that much can really wear on a person. But it's great to know that there are opportunities for people if they are willing to travel, especially in construction.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a close friend of our firm, he's a nationwide GC, based locally to us in Brighton there in Michigan. They don't do any work in Michigan, so we're allowed to be friends with them. But it's kind of like you said, the guys in their 20s and 30s, they do real well with that sort of lifestyle, and for obvious reasons. You're in a different place quite often. The guys that maintain that lifestyle, into their 40s, 50s, and maybe retire from it are pretty few and far between. There are a few, but it takes a definite mindset and lifestyle to allow that sort of travel. You really got to love the road warrior mentality.
Yeah, I had a boss who one of my first jobs, really internships, and then first job out of college, who he hit whatever the highest tier of Delta is, platinum or diamond, by typically August every year, which I think is like, 150 connections or 200 connections, 200 flights a year. And he typically hit that by like August. So, and he was in his 50s, but usually it was, out Monday, back Wednesday, maybe Thursday. So short weeks, but still, it's pretty impressive when the Delta ticket agent and flight attendants know you by name.
Yes, definitely. And there are perks that come along with that too. My wife and I took a vacation last December, and that was, we upgraded to first class on the way down to Florida. That was the absolute last bit of airline miles I could scrape together from my days traveling. So now when we fly, or when you used to fly, it's like, wow, what do you mean there's no upgrades? What do you mean you won't just put me up there? Come on.
Yeah. So with kind of transitioning back to what you're doing with Schaefer and, basically everything but residential, what are some of the project types that you really enjoy, maybe a little more than others? Obviously, as we like to say in engineering, every client's our favorite, but we always have a project type that we like maybe a little more than others.
I say we, but me personally, my favorite is true kind of hands in the dirt design build is the way I like to describe it, where we as the GC hold all of the strings. We hire the architecture staff, we hire the engineers, and we kind of lead the show for our clients. So right now we're right in the midst of building a pretty large, for the area, community center, and it's a cool project. It's about 40,000 square feet. There's a third of it is going to be multi-purpose space and some admin areas for rental, and the rest of it is 3 basketball courts with an elevated walking track around the tops of them. And that's kind of like our prototypical favorite project. We met the client a little over a year ago. They had a need, and just through some discussions, there were literally bar napkins or restaurant napkin sketches that went around, and that's kind of the onset, the conceptualization of that project. And when we can get involved that early, when the concept is really just a wish in the eyes of the owner, of the client, that's when we can provide, really immense value from our side, and we get the most enjoyment out of it. So anywhere that, you'll see us on bid day once in a while, because it's kind of a necessary evil, I think, in our industry. There's times when we are busier than, and there's times when we are slower. So we do a little bit of public work, a little bit of bid work, but, if I could have my pick every day, it would be, true design build, where we literally start from zero and take a project all the way to fruition.
That's awesome. With kind of the rise of, I think, design build, or maybe even in ways going back to the roots of, construction a couple hundred years ago, where you really had the architect and GC were kind of one and the same. And, since then we've had, more specialization as we move forward, and kind of getting back to design build has been, I think there's a lot of positive benefits out of it, and there can be some maybe pitfalls with design build too, in that, maybe contracts aren't ironed out correctly or things like that. But what, from your side, and the GC side, what's some of the big benefits that you see in running design build projects?
I think there's a lot, but one of the absolute biggest and best, I think, is the ability to control budgets for our clients. The traditional design bid model, it works in certain scenarios, but it takes a design team that really truly has a finger on the pulse of today's construction market. And in our area, at least, those are pretty few and far between. And, too often what ends up happening is, the client finds the consultant, they express their wishes, consultant leaves, designs a beautiful building or structure, whatever it may be. It goes out for bid, and it's, quite a bit over budget. And all that really leads to is frustration. It leads to an expensive set of documents. The way we approach design build, really from the very, rawest, purest form, is it allows us to kind of proceed with design and to direct our design team along with an accurate, up-to-date budgeting system. Because, we're in the trenches every day. We're signing subcontracts. Our guys are buying materials. We know the fluctuations in the market probably better than most. At least we like to think we do. And just by virtue of that, it allows us to really keep a tight grip on things, so that at the end of the process, we can go back to our client and say, hey, all right, client X, here's the building we designed for you. Hopefully they love it. And then at the end of the presentation, you can say, oh, and the best part is you can afford it. It's under budget, or it's at your budget. I think there's lots of other benefits, but if I had to pick one, that would be really the highest and best.
I would totally agree with you there. As an engineer, that I was designing, a lot of big structures, big buildings, big projects, we had, our requirements, right? Especially on the engineering side, you have a lot of baseline stuff that is pretty hard to get rid of. About the only thing, right, VE out of electrical typically is the lights. But that's about it. Everything else is, if you want power, that's about it. Obviously mechanical and a lot of the other disciplines, you can have different VE items, but by and large, it's, hey, you kind of need this if you like air conditioning or heat. But for pricing, I think that is really one of the biggest disconnects between any design firm, engineering, architecture, and an end product. Where as engineers, we're focused on putting everything together, making sure that it engineers, but we really don't deal with price ever. We're not bidding anything. We're not looking at what anything costs or how long it takes on a daily basis like you guys are, or any of your subs or anything like that. So I would totally agree in budgets and pricing that having that integrated and really walking through that throughout the entire design process is a huge, huge benefit. And that's something that I think we're starting to see more of, in that integration. And kind of along those lines, what's some of the maybe tips that you would give to either design firms or, well, really in design firms and working with you or any other general contractor in, having a successful design build project?
The biggest piece would be lose the animosity, and I mean that with all due respect to the design world, but there's a lot of quote unquote old school design firms in our area, especially, that, to those guys, we're still just the big dumb contractor, and I think that world has changed. I know that world is changing. I'm proof of it. So you got to have a willingness to form a team and to really truly collaborate on a pretty deep level to make this work. When that happens, it's truly, it's magical. It's remarkable what you can create. When it doesn't happen, it's a real pain for everybody. So I guess that'd be my request and my tip at the same time is just be open to team up, and be open to kind of step outside of the box you may be used to, and give it a shot. See if this form of contracting might lead to good things.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. The more open you can be on a project, on a job, even no matter what the kind of contract structure is, whether it's design build, plan spec, whatever, the better relationships you can have with your contractors and trade partners, the better the project goes. I've been on projects where I got along great with, for me being an electrical engineer, with the electrical contractor, and I've been on jobs where there was no making reason throughout the project, and it did not go well for anybody. A lot of little things that could have been handled easily and efficiently were not. So I totally agree that if you're willing to share it, and by and large, there's, especially if you're on the same team and under the same contract and you really want the project to be successful, there's no real secret sauce, and sharing is just going to make everybody happier at the end of the day.
Yeah,
sharing data.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely. And it's not, a lot of guys will look and say, well, those are the contractors that don't like the architects, or, those are the guys that want to, be the boss. And it's truly not that what we do. And I mean, we have consultants that we work with a lot, that really understand this model, and we get along great, and we can bounce ideas off each other, and we all bring something to the table that the other guy doesn't have. And that's the beauty of it. When it works, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of outside that, and I've seen more and more of it, and I mean, I've been a voice for it too, but within the industry, I'm trying to think of how best to phrase this. Contracts typically end up getting in the way from a lot of things, like on let's say a plan spec job or a design bid build, where, there's the architect and the GC are on basically opposite sides of the table, where the architect and engineers are, trying to make sure that everything's in the best interest of the owner. And obviously the GC is trying to do the same thing, but putting checks on each other. And where design build brings all of that under one, so that you're all on the same team. Checks are kind of internal, and or you would at least think there shouldn't be as much infighting amongst the kind of teams for the project. But I think contracts end up being a big kind of sticking point from the what is a deliverable? What should a deliverable look like, to, how you coordinate what needs to be delivered. And particularly in this kind of is leading into, prefab and pre-construction, on what gets delivered from the design team to the contractors, what the contractors are actually looking for. Obviously on a design bid build, that's kind of harder to negotiate since, the architects kind of write their own contracts, and then, the build team and the construction team gets kind of whatever the design team puts out. But where do you see contracts kind of heading in the future, and really to kind of help the team as a whole? I know that's kind of a big loaded question and a lot of facets in there, but I haven't stumbled on a good answer, or, come across anybody that has a really good answer for, doing this. Obviously design build's a great avenue to take, but for, with a lot of projects being design bid build out there, I think there's got to be something that shifts within the contract structure to kind of help everybody along. So just curious on your thoughts, and really kind of leading into pre-con and what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you that the contracts, although I think they are a necessary evil, they do tend to get in the way. They almost set up a predisposition of attitudes amongst the different parties before you even get started. And I don't know that there is a great answer. There's this, the integrated project design movement it's got some good points. I think. I don't think it's the end all answer. It's kind of a blend of the two, I guess, if you will. It's a tough question, because it's an industry that's acted and operated in virtually the same way for, my gosh, hundreds of years. And I don't know that everyone sees that it's time to change. I think maybe that's part of the problem is some people or some firms are still not wanting to let go and kind of move on to a different formula, whether it works better or not.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I mean, when you look at like a standard AA contract, most all deliverables are still in two-dimensional PDF format, right? In a spec book that's, 3,000 pages long. So
that no one reads.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, nobody reads it. Nobody looks through it. They just look at the drawing sets and skim the spec sections that, they kind of know and pick through it. So I think that's going to be the first thing that really has to change is, the model BIM as a deliverable is going to be that first piece that I think you change that deliverable, a lot of other pieces fall into place. And for everybody to understand what that deliverable looks like, everybody understands, two-dimensional PDFs. Not everybody understands three-dimensional, BIM model deliverable.
I think you're really close on that one. A lot of guys, especially here locally, you say the word BIM and they can't even comprehend what you're talking about. They just think it's some astronomically expensive, horribly complicated model that, some of the stuff we're building, they just can't see how it could ever possibly help. And granted, there are some BIM models that I've seen that are astronomically expensive and horribly complicated, but I think, the more I'm learning about it, I think there's some really good options that are kind of in between, or even on the the starter end of the BIM spectrum that aren't going to crush a budget, that aren't so complicated that you need a PhD to operate them, but can really help the project. Full disclosure, we haven't used one yet. We're looking at a project coming up here that is kind of our sweet spot design build, and I've started kind of having some talks with a couple folks about how maybe we could integrate in a quote unquote affordable kind of easy version of BIM to help things through. But I think the person that figures that one out and figures out how to make it globally acceptable to our industry is A, going to be a very rich individual someday, and B, I think they're going to solve a lot of people's problems.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it in BIM in particular, there's kind of two facets for it. One is the design team needs to really understand what that BIM deliverable needs to look like. Everything needs to be modeled, whatever level of design they're going to, like an LD, 250 or 300 model. So what does that actually mean, for each of the disciplines, each of the trades, right? There's no faking it, no putting in just lines. Like, everything actually needs to be modeled. I think is a big start to it. And then on the other side, in talking to a lot of subs, I mean, they basically rebuild the design model every time to put in their own stuff. So I think that's part of it, where the design model is, design intent versus what a subcontractor would do. And that goes for everybody from walls and ceilings to electrical to HVAC to plumbing. Whoever is going to use that model, they basically pull it apart, put it back together with their own content. So for actual constructability, and for their own prefab shops. So that becomes a big piece, is connecting the design team to the contractor team and what is actually going to be built. But for like the simple things is like a fly through of coordination, right? Like, where is the main routing going? Can all the ductwork fit in here? I think those are for a starter model, if you will, those are kind of the big core coordination components that BIM really saves on. Is, hey, we got a tight space here, or we can do all of our coordination prior to putting up a wall or anything on site.
Absolutely. And I can tell you, just this week, I showed up on the site of one of our projects, and one of my guys, one of our superintendents, had a meeting, and it was incredibly productive. He had our whole MEP squad there, and they were looking through the 2D PDFs and looking at a wall that's in place, and doing just what you just mentioned, trying to figure out how the heck do we squeeze all the ductwork and all the conduit runs and all the piping. And it's kind of amusing to me, but we were left with literally a map made with duct tape on the side of a masonry wall of our project, where, I mean, that was what they came up with to solve this problem and to see where everyone fits. And while in that instance it worked great, I applauded my guy for getting everyone that organized, because it doesn't always happen that way. But to have a model or whatever you want to call it ahead of time, that everybody on the whole team gets input in and gets to help create, whether they're actually the ones programming it or just by talking through their specific systems, to have that model to kind of show you ahead of time, I think would just be exponentially helpful on a lot of projects, if not all of them.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm seeing more and more put in place, and some efforts are led by the GCs on given projects. Some of them are actually led by the subs, and it helps them save time and effort and energy, because they can have a guy inside coordinating a bunch of projects kind of in parallel, if you will, and then their field guys can go out and execute on it, and they're not spending, you don't have kind of like you explained, where you got 6 guys standing around trying to figure out something. It can be done virtually in a conference room in an hour meeting versus driving to site and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the future of it. And then for everyone to agree on what that initial deliverable looks like are the big steps that at least I'm seeing kind of play out here.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for the day when we start seeing more and more of that. I think it helps the pre-con side. I think it helps the project as a whole, and it'll really just help the industry, because let's face it, our industry is an old one. If we don't start working on advancing and kind of getting closer to with the times, we're going to have some real problems coming up in the next, in the next decade even.
Yeah. I mean, and really as, well, like with COVID and you can't put as many guys on the job site anymore, where you're going to have to find other ways to utilize your talent and labor pool, more effectively, where, you can't have 10 guys in the same room doing finishes and, final touches on a project all at the same time.
Right.
For distancing. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on is, really how have you been able to kind of navigate the current situation with COVID and guys on site and be able to continue your projects?
So COVID's, the whole thing is just a giant monster. Obviously, we had to shut down. I personally had to shut down my first project in my entire career back in March was when Michigan officially kind of closed the doors, and it was terrible, as everyone has experienced. But to shut an active project down and walk away and just kind of fingers crossed, hope that looks the same when you get back, and that nothing's failed, nothing's leaked, nothing's worse for wear. It was a horrible feeling. And luckily on that project we got back and everything was for the most part fine. But it's tough because construction is a manual effort, right? And you got to have so many guys out there or girls, people. You got to have so many hands in the dirt. You can't really cut down that number of how many folks you have on site easily. And so it's a problem right now. A lot of our projects we're still getting buttoned up before the big winter storms hit. So we're outside where it's not as crucial. We can have guys, our masons, for example, they spread apart, a bit as far as they can. But once we get closed up on that community center project I mentioned earlier, that's a good example. We're going to have a ton of trades, and that one runs the gambit from your normal slew of, carpenters and painters and floor guys to all of the specialty stuff that goes along with sports floors and basketball equipment and all that. We're in meetings, we're in talks now of trying to strategize how best to do that and to keep people safe, obviously, and keep them separate if that's what safety looks like from now on. But it's a tough problem in our industry. I think perhaps more than most because, on my side of it, I'm just an office guy. I can handle it. I can work out of my basement if I need to. I proved that to myself and my company for, the 3 or 4 months we were down. But, for my superintendents or for my masons or for my carpenters, there's only so much you can do with a skeleton crew. And, we haven't figured out that equation yet, but it's coming rapidly. Michigan especially, we're 84 degrees today. We're going to be in the 50s next week, so we could be snowing before too long, which changes the whole dynamic out here. And I don't know that there is a great answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's something that I'm, I don't have to deal with on a daily basis like you guys do. And just hearing what you have to go through, I think for, our listeners, for everybody out there, it's not something, we really necessarily thought of. From the outside guys, like you're saying, that makes, things fairly doable, fairly, manageable. But as you get inside, as crews kind of expand from, excavators and ditch witches to, painters and masonry and specialty equipment providers and everybody else, within that same space, it takes a lot of guys to put up a building. And you, like you mentioned, when you had to shut down a job site, you can't leave a whole lot in place for too long, or it, it might not be how you need it to come back to, right? That's the other side of construction, is things are fairly fluid and need to continue to move for it to stay put, while everything stabilizes and gets put in place that we might not always think about either.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta finish baking the cake, before you take it out of the oven, and that's we left a cake that was a bowl full of batter, and we haven't thought about it as an industry. How do you do that? And like I said, I don't know that you can. Going forward on new contracts, we have language now, some horribly ugly attorney-driven language about, COVID specifically, or pandemics and epidemics and all the, it takes our normal contract and adds 3 pages of this horrible worst case scenario crap. But on projects that started before that, if we have a labor force of, let's say, 20 guys, but now all of a sudden, because of COVID or whatever regulations, we're told we can only have 10, it's a real tough sell for me to go back to a client and say, well, it's going to take twice as long, or it's going to be twice as expensive now, your choice. It puts us as GCs, especially, in kind of the ultimate pickle. So I don't know that, hoping it gets better is the best option, but there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, no. And I mean, it's really, you're doing the best you can with what you have. And it's stories like these that I think need to get out there, right? That not everyone understands the little nuances and, complete ramifications across all sorts of industries, from what's happening. So, I think for all of us, we do the best we can. We operate the best we can with the knowledge and pieces that we can put in place and implement. Definitely not easy, but we've got to move forward somehow. And I think you guys are doing that really to the best of your ability. And obviously not easy, but we got to get through this somehow and figure out ways to get back to what I hope will be our normal that we experienced, let's call it a year ago.
Absolutely. I think everybody's looking forward to that. We need to get there soon.
Shifting off of kind of the recent requirements, and we've kind of touched on technology, but what impacts and roles is technology playing for you guys, and where do you kind of see the ball moving forward?
I think technology is taking a more present role in the industry as a whole. Certainly with us, with Schaefer Construction, even just with myself, everything is moving towards the tech that's helpful, right? So whether it's doing takeoffs with PlanSwift, or we have some different estimating programs that we play around with. Our field guys all carry iPads loaded up. We use FieldWire specifically, but it's similar to PlanGrid. There's a couple other options. So our guys have access now to a litany of information and details, literally at their fingertips at any point in time, at any point on one of our job sites, and it's hugely powerful. Even as short as 10 years ago, you didn't see that. Even maybe 5 years ago, you didn't see a lot of that. And it's tech like that I see continuing to kind of take over. We have a drone guy now. We have flights through our projects for inspections and for marketing purposes. Everything like that is kind of coming together in this swirling ball of an industry that for a very, very long time was globally reluctant to change, reluctant to grow, quote unquote. I think there's a lot of, for lack of better words, there's a lot of good stuff going on. There's a lot of good tech that's actually being utilized on a daily basis that we're seeing anyways.
Yeah, there's definitely been more and more that have been implemented. I know a hospital project that I worked on in particular, we were redoing 30 operating rooms. And with that, the architect hired a company to come in and do laser scans and photogrammetry of it to basically recreate all 30 operating rooms, so that, you know, that company went in, did everything after hours, you know, between like 1 and 4 a.m. to take pictures and scan the whole thing, so that the design team, one, never had to go into the ORs, and two, we could get in effectively and look at each of the rooms, you know, on demand, which you'd never be able to do in the past, or it'd be hugely inconvenient to, you know, go into these ORs, gown up at, you know, you get there at 11 o'clock, get in at 11:30, be there for 3 hours that you were able to then, you know, gown out, go back, you know, get home at 4 in the morning to go back to work at 8. Just isn't feasible. And then, you know, you hope you took the right pictures and the thing you needed wasn't 6 inches out of frame.
Definitely. And that stuff is so cool too. Have you seen, I think they call it Spot, the little robotic camera dog?
I have, yeah.
I don't know what they cost, but I would love to get one just to mess with it. 'Cause you know, stuff like that I think is just so neat to see it coming through and it coming into our industry, and the possibilities are literally endless.
Yeah. So for everybody that maybe hasn't heard of Spot or any of the robotics, so it comes out of Boston Robotics. They've done like the humanoid dogs, and which is what Spot, or the four-legged kind of dog thing that you've probably seen pictures or videos on the internet where somebody could kick it and it would stay upright, primarily for like military applications where you'd have basically a pack robot to get through like rough terrain. They've also done like the humanoid where robots running on a treadmill, stuff like that. So Boston Robotics, I believe, is the company. But they have, it might be Boston Dynamics, but anyway, they've Spot's a dog, or a four-legged little robot. It's, you know, maybe 2.5, 3 feet high, and probably about the same length, and not that wide, like 1.5 feet wide. With Spot, they've mounted really a number of cameras, and what Matt was alluding to is that on a given project, what you can do with Spot, and they cost, I think it's like 73 grand is what the cost of Spot is, somewhere in that ballpark, between 70 and 80,000, is you would effectively set it up and it could go and do daily walks through your job site. So take pictures, video, whatever you want through the job site, basically your daily progress photos. And for like the community center that you're talking about, it could go and walk the like main floor, right, every day. And then the areas that are a little harder to get to, like a mechanical mezzanine or whatever, your project engineer or superintendent would still have to go and climb the ladder to go up there. But Spot could do basically the daily progress photos and scans of it. And then like as you got your walking track installed, right, Spot can go and do a daily walk around the track. And give you all those kind of progress photos. So it Spot's a augmentation to basically a project engineer, site superintendent to go and do daily progress photos, or however often you want. You could do morning, evening. I mean, literally as much as you want, because again, it doesn't take any of your time other than to see Spot run.
Yeah, kick the thing out the door and tell it to go. It's pretty cool.
Yep. And what? So outside of robotics, what's kind of the thing that you would like to see implemented, or some technology solution that would help you guys out in the field?
Out in the field, you know, there's a lot of things that could come out there to help our field guys, especially, you know, like I mentioned, the iPads and having the plans, you know, at their fingertips is great. They're still a little clunky, you know. Like today, for example, I was meeting with a client and all I had was my iPad. So trying to snap measurements with my, you know, sausage fingers on my iPad is just, it works in a pinch, but it's not great. So I would say, you know, refining kind of we kind of exploded this tech market, I think, in the last, you know, five years or so, especially with the iPads, but kind of refining usability of some of those items, I think would be very helpful right now. And just make them kind of easier for the average guy or girl to handle and to utilize to its fullest.
Absolutely. And what about in the office? Is there anything that you see coming out that would really help firms kind of in the office or the back of house type of stuff?
Certainly on the pre-construction side, I mean, we're very heavily pre-con focused, and that's how we can provide the value we do with design build. So, anything that helps to tie all of the disciplines involved together. We talked a bit about BIM and there's some other design softwares I think out there that are trying to do this and trying to, kind of loop everyone in the same page. I don't know what that product's called, but whatever it is, it needs to get us all in the same room, be it, physically or virtually, and get everyone's disciplines and ideas into one program that we can all utilize. So, I kind of have this vision of this global system that I start on the pre-con side, and my superintendent's using it, my plumbers are using it, my mechanical guys use it, the carpenters have their version, and I don't know that ever happens from a cost perspective, but it would certainly be a cool thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we'll go back a little bit and talking about pre-con and bringing really value to your clients. How has pre-con done that for you, and what's kind of your big value proposition there at Schaefer for pre-con and kind of your services?
So pre-construction, a lot of people look at it and they call it estimating, and it's so much more than that. But the systems that we have in place and that we utilize, I mean, we have the ability now through our in-house databases, through our connections, our consultants, we can provide very solid budget numbers off of very, very limited information for almost any project. Obviously, there's some specialty stuff that we get involved in that is a little different, but for your average project, in-house, we can, with a floor plan, an elevation, and a site plan, we can get a number together that, I would stand behind. This is within 5% of reality, and we'll go to contract on that sometimes. And what that does, it creates a feeling of trust, obviously, because we take a humongous risk in doing that, but we take it, in a very calculated way, because we're confident in our abilities to manage that process, and that our numbers are good. It cuts down on the design cost immensely, because if we can get to the bottom line number, like I said, in 3 drawings, we can go to construction with maybe 30 drawings instead of, some of the packets we get are, hundreds of pages, plus, you mentioned the 3,000 page specs. We are systematically trying to remove specs from the construction world, or at least, written book specs. There's information contained in there that everybody needs, I think, but we're seeing more and more of the benefit of just including that information in the drawings themselves in short form, and it cuts down on clutter. It cuts down on some of the headache involved in it. But just the whole pre-construction effort and leading the design. The worst thing in my mind that can ever happen to a client is to design something and then not be able to build it. And our commitment at Schaefer, and my commitment, really personally, is that I don't want to see that happen. And I think with the right tools in place, and by giving us that level of trust, we can guarantee that at the end of the day, you as the client are going to get what you need, get what you want, and you're going to be able to afford it at the same time, which is, you get those 3 key components, and great things happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more disheartening than a VE process at the end of a, bid.
Oh, they're terrible.
VE, and yeah, nobody's happy.
Yeah, they're terrible because let's face it, at the end of the day, VE is just how much scope can we pull out. There's no value engineering anymore. It's what can we, hack and slice out of this project to make the number drop below that magic line. And, there's creative ideas, and not to suggest that there's not ways to do that better, but for the most part, that's what it is. It's de-scoping the project.
Yeah.
And you have to sometimes, right? But if we can avoid that from the get-go, I think everybody's a lot happier.
Yeah, and I think if we called it de-scoping, it would just add more clarity versus trying to shiny up a pig, basically, and
Exactly.
value engineering. A couple last questions for you, Matt, is where do you see the future of building? Where do you see construction going? Obviously, we've talked a lot about tech, and let's just assume that we get back to normal. Where do you see kind of building going and construction? And obviously, you'll know more about your market there in Michigan than around the country. But where do you kind of see the project types heading, and what's your kind of take on the future of building?
So I think, to be quite honest, the future of building right now is kind of grim. And I say that with all candor, but if we as an industry cannot figure out very quickly how to renew interest in the trades, in construction, across the young folks in America, we're going to lose out big time because, and we're starting to see it in our industry now. We're not getting a good influx of young, men and women coming into the trades. And what it's doing is, you've got a foreman or a supervisor who's, been in this game for 30, 40 plus years. They have a wealth of knowledge, but that knowledge leaves once they finally decide to retire. And, we're having a big struggle, I think industry-wide, but certainly in our market here, of getting kids, if you will, interested in the trades again. So I think, that's kind of a personal mission project of my own, a little side project I'm toiling with trying to launch. But we got to make the trades cool again, for lack of better term. We got to make people realize that there are other options other than jumping into college right after high school. And it's college isn't for everybody. There's a world of possibility working in construction that I think we're missing the boat somewhere. And I don't know if it starts in school or if it starts somewhere else, but we're missing the boat on getting people interested and excited to go out and and work with your hands again. And especially with the whole COVID mess, when we kind of split everybody up and stuck ourselves in our basements or our breakfast nooks or whatever with laptops, I think we all realized that human connection is pretty important. And building construction in general can certainly provide that. There's a level of camaraderie on our job sites that is second to none. It's really it's a cool thing to see when you've got the 50-some-year-old blue collar badass who's been doing this his whole life, kind of showing the new guy, the 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, the ropes. And when you see that camaraderie form, and when you see that connection kind of form in the younger person's mind, it's neat, and you kind of see the future of the industry forming. But again, there's not enough of that happening. Because somewhere along the lines, we, as a society, decided that construction wasn't cool, that manual labor jobs, were kind of second rate, or less. Somehow we as an industry need to figure this problem out, because if we don't, there's going to be nobody left, and it's going to drive pricing through the roof. It's going to kill schedules, and excuse me, I think it eventually kills the industry as a whole.
Man, I agree on so many fronts. Obviously I went to engineering school and got licensed and that whole thing. But I find that there's a lot of guys and girls that are like, I'm not the most mechanically inclined guy. Like, I'll straight up admit that. Like, when it comes to fixing, most things, like, I can get by, but my craftsmanship is second rate at best. And there's a lot of guys and girls that I know that, man, their mechanical inclination and skills are just incredible. And for those people to, go to college is almost a waste of their talents. And I think getting those people into the trades, getting them into a place where, you're getting paid immediately, you're making money, you're, not carrying any debt really, and is a great career path for a lot of those people. They could stay and work with their hands for their entire lives, or, transition into different areas within the business, right? Going from, somebody that's like a, young green apprentice to a journeyman to a superintendent to project manager. And there's a good known career path within construction that I think a lot of people very much overlook, and they overlook the pay within the industry, and that you're getting paid the entire time that you're there. There's no point in which you're not getting paid. So I think that that's a big piece of construction. Sure, there's pieces that are cyclical, but we've been going through that for a long time, and there's ways to kind of handle that for a lot of people. So I think you are absolutely correct. We do need more people within our trades. There's a lot of people that whose skills and talents and inclination can go to the trades with a little bit of effort and direction. They would do fantastic within any of the trades.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you hit the nail on the head, no pun intended, but, you don't have to necessarily be mechanically inclined to succeed in this industry, right? I think it's a good place to start for a lot of people is literally out in the trenches, getting their hands dirty and bruising their knuckles. But you could go my path. I started in the field, and I did it all, and I got sore, and I worked with my hands, and I created great things, and eventually found my way into the office side of it. And I'd be lying if I told you there aren't days when I go to one of my job sites and I think, man, it'd be nice to just throw the bags on again, or grab the hard hat and leave this stupid laptop alone for a little while. But there's all kinds of options out there, because we need guys and girls on both sides. We need the office, we need the pre-con, we need the salesman, as much as we need the field. And construction can't go anywhere. It's an industry that can't go away. I don't care how many cool robots we post about on our LinkedIn page, at Schaefer, and now there's trucks that can lay masonry, and that stuff is great. The tech we talked about is great, but the industry itself, we're going to constantly evolve as a society. We have to. That's kind of the law of the land. So construction's here to stay. It's just a matter of, can we keep it a good place to be before it gets out of control here, and before we lose that that talent that we are lacking right now.
Yeah, completely. It goes on both sides of the fence, design, construction, estimating, sales. You kind of named all of them there. Everybody is kind of, they don't like construction, or maybe it's not brought up as a viable career path. Even in engineering, like designing buildings isn't, there's no real courses on it. There's, architects obviously, but for the engineering disciplines, building construction's kind of a forgotten thing, and, it's definitely a viable career path. So, I think across the board, construction's kind of thought as a second tier thing, when in fact, it drives the world that we live in today. And without construction, from roads to bridges to buildings, we'd be living in huts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of the final thing, and first, where can they find you, Matt? What's the best place to reach out and find you?
So our website is schaeferconstruction.net. It's SCHAFER. We have a Schaefer Construction LinkedIn page and Facebook. You can find me at Matt Vetter on LinkedIn and Facebook. Admittedly, I'm way behind the times, and I'm still trying to figure out this whole Instagram thing. So we're kind of limping our way right there. But those would be the easiest methods to get a hold of us right now.
Awesome. Yeah, and guys, you should definitely reach out, find Matt, see what they're up to. They've got some cool stuff that's going on. And my last question, Matt, is having been in construction for 20 years, what's something that maybe you wish you had known as you're starting out? So for that young guy or girl out there that's thinking about construction, that made it all the way to the end of this podcast, what is something that you would, tell yourself or them getting into the construction industry?
Never stop learning. Find those guys, those crusty old guys that have been doing this forever, and stick to them like glue, because those are the guys that be it tradesmen, be it the crusty old guy in the office, setting up estimates, or the crusty old architect, those are the guys that have seen more than you have. Those are the guys to reach out to really kind of get into that mentor-mentee relationship if you can, because there's a ton of knowledge out there in this industry. There's not a lot of it that you can learn reading a book. So I would just say, excuse me, find those guys, those women, and really kind of glom onto them and soak up as much as you can, and you'll go great places doing just that.
Completely agree. Yeah, there's very few books on construction. It's really all just passed down and getting beaten or screwing up something so badly that it sticks with you. We've all had that through our careers, or been told some horror stories that stick with us. So it's more campfire stories than anything in books when it comes to lessons learned in construction. So I completely agree with what Matt said, is find somebody that's got some age and wear and tear on them and been beaten down a couple times, and they'll help to not lead you astray. With that,
I like that. I like the campfire stories. That's a good one. I'm going to use that.
With that, Matt, any final closing thoughts?
Dillon, I had a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you inviting me on, and hopefully somebody can glean something from this, because it was fun to talk about, and it's an industry I love. I'm doing it not because I'm forced to. I wouldn't choose any other way. So I appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. And guys, we've covered a ton of ground today. From robotics to contracts to what design build should actually look like, and that collaboration is not your enemy. It's a great way to work together and to make projects go seamlessly and flow much better. So if you got something out of this podcast, if you liked it, share it. If you know somebody that is wanting to get into construction or maybe thinking about it, share this podcast. Know that construction is a great place for you to build and grow a career and really a way of life. So if you like camaraderie, if you like building things, if you like seeing things come up and out of the ground, construction is a great industry for you, and share this with somebody that you think would benefit from it. So until next time, guys, that's this episode of the Construction Corner Podcast.